Wake up with Wake. I'll hang out with you. We can keep each other company. Feel free to mute at any time and unmute at any time.
Optimist within an hour. I can turn myself into a shouting optimist within an hour. By Roger W. Babson, famous economist. When I find myself depressed over present conditions, I can, within 1 hour, banish worry and turn myself into a shouting optimist. Here is how I do it. I enter my library, close my eyes, and walk to certain shelves containing only books on history. With my eyes still shut, I reach for a book, not knowing whether I am picking up Prescott's Conquest of Mexico or Suetonius' Lives of the 12 Caesars. With my eyes still closed, I open the book at random. I then open my eyes and read for an hour. And the more I read, the more sharply I realize that the world has always been in the throes of agony, that civilization has always been tottering on the brink. The pages of history fairly shriek with tragic tales of war, famine, poverty, pestilence, and man's inhumanity to man. After reading history for an hour, I realize that bad as conditions are now, they are infinitely better than they used to be. This enables me to see and face my present troubles in their proper perspective, as well as to realize that the world as a whole is constantly growing better. Here is a method that deserves a whole chapter. Read history. Try to get the viewpoint of 10,000 years and see how trivial your troubles are in terms of eternity. How I Got Rid of an Inferiority Complex by Elmer Thomas, former United States Senator from Oklahoma. When I was 15, I was constantly tormented by worries and fears and self-consciousness. I was extremely tall for my age and thin as a fence rail. I stood 6 feet 2 inches and weighed only 118 pounds. In spite of my height, I was weak and could never compete with the other boys in baseball or running games. They poked fun at me and called me Hatchet Face. I was so worried and self-conscious that I dreaded to meet anyone, and I seldom did, for our farmhouse was off the public road and surrounded by thick virgin timber that had never been cut since the beginning of time. We lived half a mile from the highway, and a week would often go by without my seeing anyone except my mother, father, brothers, and sisters. I would have been a failure in life if I'd let those worries and fears whip me. Every day and every hour of the day, I brooded over my tall, gaunt, weak body. I could hardly think of anything else. My embarrassment, my fear was so intense that it's almost impossible to describe it. My mother knew how I felt. She'd been a school teacher, so she said to me, "Son, you ought to get an education. You ought to make your living with your mind because your body will always be a handicap." Since my parents were unable to send me to college, I knew I'd have to make my own way. So I hunted and trapped a possum, skunk, mink, and raccoon one winter, sold my hides for $4 in the spring, then bought 2 little pigs with my $4. I fed the pigs slop and later corn and sold them for $40 the next fall. With the proceeds from the sale of the 2 hogs, I went away to the Central Normal College, located in Danville, Indiana. I paid $1.40 a week for my board, 50 cents a week for my room. I wore a brown shirt my mother had made me. Obviously, she used brown cloth because it wouldn't show dirt. I wore a suit of clothes that had once belonged to my father. Dad's clothes didn't fit me, and neither did his old Congress gator shoes that I wore, shoes that had elastic bands in the sides that stretched when you put them on. The stretch had long since gone out of the bands, and the tops were so loose the shoes almost dropped off my feet as I walked. I was so embarrassed to associate with the other students, so I sat in my room alone and studied. The deepest desire of my life was to be able to buy some store clothes that fit me, clothes that I was not ashamed of. Shortly after that, 4 events happened that helped me to overcome my worries and my feeling of inferiority. One of these events gave me courage and hope and confidence and completely changed all the rest of my life. I'll describe these events briefly. First, after attending this normal school for only 8 weeks, I took an examination and was given a 3rd grade certificate to teach in the country public schools. To be sure, this certificate was good for only 6 months, but it was fleeting evidence that somebody had faith in me. The first evidence of faith that I had ever had from anyone except my mother. Second, a country school board at a place called Happy Hollow hired me to teach at a salary of $2 a day, or $40 a month. Here was even more evidence of somebody's faith in me. Third, as soon as I got my first check, I bought some store clothes that I wasn't ashamed to wear. If someone gave me $1 million now, it wouldn't thrill me half as much as that first suit of clothes, for which I paid only a few dollars. Fourth, the real turning point in my life, the first great victory in my struggle against embarrassment and inferiority, occurred at the Putnam County Fair, held annually in Bainbridge, Indiana. My mother had urged me to enter a public speaking contest that was to be held at the fair. To me, the very idea seemed fantastic. I didn't have the courage to talk to even one person, let alone a crowd. But my mother's faith in me was almost pathetic. She dreamed great dreams for my future. She was living her own life over in her son. Her faith inspired me to enter the contest. I chose for my subject about the last thing in the world that I was qualified to talk on, the fine and liberal arts of America. Frankly, when I began to prepare the speech, I didn't know what the liberal arts were, but it didn't matter much because my audience didn't know either. I memorized my flowery talk and rehearsed it to the trees and cows 100 times. I was so eager to make a good showing for my mother's sake that I must have spoken with emotion. At any rate, I was awarded first prize. I was astounded at what happened. A cheer went up from the crowd. The very boys who'd once ridiculed me and poked fun at me and called me hatchet face now slapped me on the back and said, "I knew you could do it, Elmer." My mother put her arms around me and sobbed. As I look back in retrospect, I can see that winning that speaking contest was the turning point of my life. The local newspapers ran an article about me on the front page and prophesied great things for my future. Winning that contest put me on the map locally and gave me prestige, and what's far more important, it multiplied my confidence 100-fold. I now realize that if I'd not won that contest, I probably would never have become a member of the United States Senate, for it lifted my sights, widened my horizons, and made me realize that I had latent abilities that I never dreamed I possessed. Most important, however, was the fact that the first prize in the oratorical contest was a year's scholarship in the Central Normal College. I hungered now for more education, so during the next few years, from 1896 to 1900, I divided my time between teaching and studying. In order to pay my expenses at DePaul University, I waited on tables, looked after furnaces, mowed lawns, kept books, worked in the wheat and cornfields during the summer, and hauled gravel on a public road construction job. In 1896, when I was only 19, I made 28 speeches urging people to vote for William Jennings Bryan for president. The excitement of speaking for Bryan aroused a desire in me to enter politics myself. So when I entered DePaul University, I studied law and public speaking. In 1899, I represented the university in a debate with Butler College, held in Indianapolis, on the subject, resolved that United States senators should be elected by popular vote. Well, I won other speaking contests and became editor-in-chief of the class of 1900 college annual, The Mirage, and the university paper, The Palladium. After receiving my AB degree at DePaul, I took Horace Greeley's advice, only I didn't go west, I went southwest. I went down to a new country, Oklahoma, when the Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache Indian Reservation was opened. I homesteaded a claim and opened a law office in Lawton, Oklahoma. I served in the Oklahoma State Senate for 13 years, in the lower house of Congress for 4 years, and at 50 years of age, I achieved my lifelong ambition. I was elected to the United States Senate from Oklahoma. I've served in that capacity since March 4th, 1927. Since Oklahoma and Indian Territories became the state of Oklahoma on November 16, 1907, I have been continuously honored by the Democrats of my adopted state by nominations, first for state Senate and for Congress, and later for the United States Senate. I've told this story not to brag about my own feeling of accomplishment, which can't possibly interest anyone else. I've told it wholly with the hope that it may give renewed courage and confidence to some poor boy who's now suffering from the worries and shyness and feeling of inferiority that devastated my life when I was wearing my father's cast-off clothes and gaiter shoes that almost dropped off my feet as I walked. It's interesting to know that Elmer Thomas, who was so ashamed of his ill-fitting clothes as a youth, was later voted the best-dressed man in the United States Senate.